Hey everyone, Shane Smythe with Salesforce Mojo. We're back for our second episode in the B2B commerce series. Today we're going to be talking about workspaces and all the things you can do to configure your storefront and how to actually utilize these. Let's jump right into it. All right, we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to start off by getting into our Scratch org that we set up last time, or any other org that has B2B commerce set up. The first thing that you'll see when you jump into your instance is typically this home page right here. This is the home page of the Commerce app. If you're not seeing this, you can come up to the app switcher and you can search for Commerce, and you should be able to see this app right here. If you're doing a non-Scratch org and not following the process we talked about last time, you might have to go through the process of setting up Commerce, going in setup, getting order management, or I should say order settings set up, and go through that full process before you'll see this app appear. But if you followed through with us in the last series, you should be able to go right into the Commerce app and you'll be able to see this homepage. Once you are here, you will see that you have a couple of quick links here at the top, which will dive you into some of the workspaces we're going to talk about here in a bit. But we're actually going to start from our store we set up last time. So if you remember correctly, I set up the store Shane, so I'm going to jump right into this storefront. You can see that once we're on this panel here, you kind of have the left-hand side, which are all the things that you can do with your storefront. The right-hand side is all of the different things you need to do to get your store up and running. And you can see that for us, this is all checked across the board because that setup process we talked about last time did all that magic and got all the products in there and the buyer groups and the index ran and activated so that we actually can get into our storefront. First place we're going to start here is with Experience Builder. And Experience Builder is the community that your storefront is hosted on. Used to be called Community Cloud if you're been around the Salesforce community for a while. So we're first going to tap into this, and actually I like this quite a bit from this Commerce app. You can click into it and it drops you right into Community. If you're using communities in a non-storefront setup, you actually have to go into Setup, then you have to go to the Experiences side, find your site, click Builder, and it's kind of like this 6-step process to get to the right place, but has a nice little handy link in here for us. So we're going to get rid of this notification here since we're familiar with the basics. But you can see that it drops us here on the home page for us, and across the top we have all of our categories and navigation, and I'm actually going to start by diving into this navigation menu here and clicking Edit Default Navigation. So because we've used the B2B template for this community, it's now enabled as a storefront. And with that comes a lot of extra capabilities that normal Community Cloud doesn't have. One of those is this storefront categories menu item. And what this does is automatically pulls in all the categories associated with your storefront and shows them very nicely here across the top and gives you the ability to have top level categories and sub level categories. So if you just want that, it's pretty easy because it automatically populates. You of course can add more menu items there and really go to town with whatever your storefront actually needs. So we're going to leave that there. We can scroll down and we can see that we have this kind of big menu section across the top, the hero, and we can make some customizations or we can hide it and really make it our own storefront. And then as we go across the bottom here, one thing I did want to call out is a couple of the areas that you are able to customize and pull in for your storefront specifically. So one of those is the order list and the quick order. Those are things you can pull in right to the home page. And if we go over to the component section, we can see that there is a commerce section right here where we can actually pull in very specific things to our commerce and storefront implementation. So that's a quick overview here. We're actually going to dive back into this in a later video and go further into like the product detail page and product list and cart and checkout. But for today, this is kind of a quick overview of each of these sections. All right, so jumping back here to our main store, we can see that the next area is this content management. So we click into content management. It's going to hop us over to the content management as part of communities. But if we go in here to Digital Experience App, this Digital Experience App is what was previously called CMS. And so you can see at the top, CMS Workspaces is now called Digital Experiences. And this is where you can keep all the content for your storefront and your community. The most common thing is product images, attachments, things of that nature, even like, the logo for the storefront. But in our case, we're going to do some of that today, and we're also going to do a little bit more creative uses of it further in this series. But we can notice that this is actually one area that isn't set up already for us. So we're going to go ahead and click Add Workspace. And we're going to go ahead and call this Shane Workspace. And click Next. And then we're going to assign it to our community here, or the storefront. It'll appear there automatically. We'll click Next. It'll automatically tag you as a user, but you can also add other users if you have them in the instance who need to be able to contribute to the images there. And then we'll select English as our language and default language. And once we've reviewed this, we'll click Done. We've now mapped the CMS workspace to our storefront. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the digital experiences CMS capabilities. We're actually going to use this a little bit later as we add products. But for now, let's go back to our home page. We'll come back over to our home page here and a couple other sections that we'll dive in here. One of them is categories. This is really important as you start to evaluate how you're going to set up your storefront. We mentioned a little bit as we are looking at the actual experience builder and the categories at the top here. But you can see that the that quick start capability deployed a couple of those categories in for us. So we can see that we're using the Capricorn coffee example that Salesforce uses quite a bit. So we have some coffee machines in here, espresso machines, different beans, sub beans, and some coffee and grinder accessory categories. Those are all completely flexible. So these are ones that have been put in, and we can either delete these or create new ones, and each store, if you have multiple stores, can have their own categories as well. So just to provide a little bit of usage of this, we're actually going to create a new category for us, and let's call this one pastries. And we're going to leave the rest of this blank here. You can give it a description, you can give it a sort order so that it shows up correctly in the experience builder. You do want to make sure that it attaches to the right catalog, and that catalog is going to be the one that associates to your store. So if you're actually doing this, not with a quick start, your catalog probably would say like Shane's catalog or something applicable to the store, but because this is part of the quick start, it says catalog from quick start. And then you can also start to do the parent-child relationships that we had talked about. We'll go ahead and click save on that one, and we want to make sure that it does say show on menu here. And once we've created that, we can start now adding new products directly to this category as we go throughout this. So we'll close these out and go back to our home page. So now we have a new category here. How do we add new products? So I'm going to jump past some of the manage your store. We'll come back to this in a little bit. We're actually going to go down to our products workspace. So after you get your first storefront launched and you have all the basic settings working, you're going to spend a lot of time with products, right? Because that's the thing you're actually here to sell. You're here to sell your products. And so you'll be refreshing this information. You'll be adding new products. You might be taking old products down. So it's really important as you think about your storefront, how do I manage my products effectively? Is another system holding that information? Do you have an ERP or a PIM? Or are you doing this directly in Salesforce? So it's a key area to kind of consider, how do I manage this properly and at scale? But you can see again, because of the deployment we did, we have a lot of products in here with the different categories we had talked about, and a lot of them are active right now. So one of the things we're going to do here is we're going to click add. I do want to call out real quick that there are actually two ways to add products from this space. There's the add right here, which will pop up on modal, and it will give us the ability to add a simple product. And so you can see right here, this product class is simple. That is just a single product. There's no customization about it, but you can come over here and click create variation parent. We'll talk more about this in a future video about what a variation parent is. But basically what this lets you do is add a product that has children so that when you go to the product page, you can select a drop down and say, I want to buy a medium shirt or a this type of bean or a that type of bean. And it gives you the ability to have that relationship on the back end and show it to customers with a nice drop down and variations there. But for our use cases, we're actually going to click add. a simple product, and we're just going to add bagels. So let's put this in as a plain bagel. We'll want it active. You can add a product code, so we'll do all caps on bagel. And you can assign it to a product family. That's not required. Product description, again, none of these are really required. It's best practice to put in a product description because it shows up on the page. You will want to select a price book. In our case, there's a couple different price books that you can utilize. And when you create a storefront, there's actually two that are auto-generated. There's the standard or basic one. And then there's the strike-through price, which will allow you to do discounting, which we'll talk about in a later video. For today, we'll do the basic one right here. And let's say that this is going to be $4 list price. And we're also going to give it US dollars. And we want to assign it to our new pastries category we just created. We want to make sure that we assign it to the correct buyer group. We'll talk about buyer groups later here, but that gives us the association back to who should see this product. And then we want to give it an image. So let's get a new image in here. We'll add content, and we're going to upload it from our desktop here. And let's drop this in. Nice bagel right here. Click save, and you can kind of see that what we just did there, see CMS Workspace, that's adding it to the CMS automatically for us through this nice little modal here. And we can do the same thing on this one. Because we've already uploaded it, we can use it again. So we'll click bagel, save. Quick walkthrough of this. Product list image is the image that you're going to see in the list page, which has multiple products in it. Product detail image, you can see it can have up to 8 images. This is when you're looking at just bagel and you want to be able to see multiple images. And typically this is shown through a type of carousel. So you have that kind of flexibility there. You also have the ability to do attachments, which I'll show you here in a minute. Okay, so we have a new plain bagel product in here. If we go back to media, you can see that we've filled in those 2 images there, but we also have the ability to do attachments. So in a lot of B2B cases, there's product detail or spec documents that want to be attached to the product so that when users look at it, they can really see the specifics of it without having to drop everything on the page. So that's a really nice capability. And then same thing here, you can use CMS Workspaces to upload the PDF images and make sure that the users can see that. Okay, one thing I did want to call out here is if you look at the right-hand side, we have this kind of related list quick links, but it's not really showing us all the information we need. It does show price books, which I'll mention here quickly. You can see that it has both a standard price book and that basic one we talked about. It is required for B2B commerce to have both of these. The way that Salesforce has products and price books set up, you have to have a price book, or a standard price book, I should say, for every single product, regardless of where it's and how it's used. But we do want one that is specific to the storefront, or more potentially. So you want to make sure that you do have both of those in there. We are missing a couple other things like categories, for instance. So we're actually going to go up to Setup and click Edit Object. Let's just throw those on the page layout real quick. All right, so the ones you'll want to pull on here and likely keep throughout your implementation is categories, entitlements, and that's probably good for now. There's a couple other ones you could pull on here, but those are the essential ones that you need to have in order for it to show up in the storefront. All right, so now that we have that set up, we'll come back over here, we'll give it a quick refresh, and we should see those new related items showing up over here. And we do, perfect. So you can see that we've associated this to the category, and you can have more than one category there. And you can see that it's also part of an entitlement policy, which we will talk about in a little bit. But in short, it is basically the ability to see this for specific people or specific groups of people. All right, so now we have a new product set up. We'll come back over to our home page for our store. Okay, so we're going to scroll back down here. There's a couple other workspaces we're not going to touch on today, but we might in the future. One of them is pricing. It basically is a different view of your products. So if you go in here, you can see all the products with their different prices and really manage the prices and the price books associated to them. Especially if you have a lot of different types of price books, this is really nice and handy. Promotions is another one that we'll probably dive into later. It's all about promotions in the storefront at checkout, auto applied and manually applied. We're probably doing an episode just on that later in the series. And same thing with customers. We're actually going to touch a little bit on customers, more how to actually get them set up, but then being able to manage those is an important part of this workspace. We're actually going to go back up to search real quick. And if we go to search, this is a key area that you need to keep in mind as you are modifying the content that should show up in the storefront. One of the things you need to know is that once you've added a new product or made those modifications, you need to rebuild the search index. The search index basically is a cache of all of the products and images that should show up associated to those products for your storefront. It's not real time. So if you just made a change like we did for the plain bagel, that's not going to show up on your storefront. So if you're going through this exercise or trying to set up new products and you're not seeing on the storefront and you feel like you should go check when the last time is that you rebuilt your search index. And you can see here that we did ours the first time we actually did the series, or the first episode of the series, and we haven't done it since. So we'll quickly click Rebuild Index. And right now this is an all or nothing. Although in the release that's coming out in the next week or two, they're doing the ability to have partial rebuild of indexes, because for storefronts that have a lot of products, it does take some time. And right now it's a little bit inefficient in the sense that it goes and basically tries to get everything again instead of just the updates you've made. It does say it takes up to 4 hours, but in reality, it's like 10 to 30 minutes and sometimes bigger if you have a lot of different products. But for us, it shouldn't take that long. So we'll let that kind of run for a moment and I'll talk through the rest of these. These are really important for kind of how you utilize the different fields inside of your search and the results pages. So the searchables field section, that's a tongue twister right there, is all about what you can actually use to search and find products in the storefront. Really easy to manage. You can come in here and click Manage Searchable Fields, and you can see all the different fields that are available right now. If we were to add a custom field, like we wanted to add height or width or whatever it may be for the products, those would show up in here, and you would be able to click them as kind of custom fields. So it's pretty handy to be able to add those. You do want to be careful how many fields you add to the searchable index, because this will potentially skew how searches are done and what actually shows up when a user tries to search on the top. So you'll want to kind of test it out and see, is this field going to provide a better search result, or is it actually hurting the overall indicator there? Next section is the results filter. The results filter is when you're going to the product list page. It actually allows you to see filters or facets on the left-hand side. And these facets or filters allow you to take all of your products, let's say you have 200, and narrow them down to the 2 or 3 you might be looking for. By default and mandatory is the category tree structure that you really can't get rid of, but you can add more if you want to. So I could add a product family, I could add unit of measure. Again, if I had width or color or any other custom fields on my product, I could take those and move them over on the right hand side, and then those would start to show up there. The last couple sections here is just how the sorting rules work across the different sites. There's a couple areas this is actually affected by, so you can manage those here, and then you can make some changes to the facets and the grouping and a couple of other things on this page here. But the key things in this section are definitely the search index and these first 2 sections. So we'll close out of this and we'll go back to the home page. One last section I wanted to go over here is administration. The administration is very key. This is mostly used when you're first coming into your storefront and setting everything up. Although you definitely want to make sure you're familiar with this area as you make changes and start to grow kind of your footprint of your storefront and start to utilize it. So I'll kind of give a quick overview of each of the sections here. The general settings is as what it says, the general settings of localization, defaults for languages and pricing, and then the ability to kind of export information if you want to migrate it from instance to instance. It's pretty key there. Let's go down to the next section here, which is buyer access. So this is when we start to get into buyer groups. Buyer groups are the ability to show selections of products to specific users. So I've had this link open here, so I'm going to hop over here. This is one of the links I'll drop into the notes of this video here, and we'll probably reference it a couple of times in this series because it has some really good information about the data model, but also like the checkout flow and payment process here. But you want to get familiar with the data model of B2B commerce because it is a little bit more complex than the standard sales and service data model here. But one of the things that you'll want to keep in mind is, how do I show my products to my users? So in this case, we have this concept of buyer groups. And you can see kind of here on the middle of the page, we have this buyer group linking the buyer account up here, which is just an account, but it's set up in a specific way. And it has some data behind it as well and records behind it. But in essence, you have a normal account that you set up as a buyer account, and you're basically saying, I want to assign this account to see this grouping of products. In some really simple B2B commerce implementations, you might only have one buyer group, which is just general. But in some other cases, you might have some that are specific to ranks or tiers, like gold, platinum, silver customers, or you might have some that are restricted products or products that are only visible to certain accounts. Those are all handled at the buyer group level, or in most cases they are. You can do it a couple of different ways. But you can definitely split your products up down at the buyer group level, and then each of the accounts are members of that buyer group. And those buyer groups are associated to a store, to a price book, to products, to entitlement policies. So they're all really interlinked here, but this is kind of the first introduction I want to do to that concept, and then we'll kind of tie a little bit into this later as we get into adding a new customer. Okay, so that's that. One other area here that's really important is the guest browsing. In some cases, your B2B storefront should have guest browsing. They should be able to see the products on the storefront. They will be able to see the products, but they won't be able to see the actual prices, and they won't be able to see the actual cart page and be able to add products to the cart page. So you can do a little bit of customization there, but that's kind of the default state. And if you need something outside of that, you probably are going to need to look at a different solution there. Okay, so then we start to get into our integration mappings. So out of the box, B2B Commerce has a couple different integration mappings. One of them is store inventory. And what I'll say here is that they all come with the default checkout. However, you can take things out if you don't want them. So for instance, you might not care about inventory for your first release of commerce. You don't have that information available, or it's not applicable to your end customers. So you can not attach something here, but you will need to make some modifications to your checkout. But you can see that this one's associated to something called check inventory. Check inventory is one of those adapters that came with that GitHub repo that we were talking through last time. And basically, it's an Apex class that provides information to the storefront in a very specific way. And we'll see this information both for the inventory, for tax. You can see that we're doing one for compute taxes. We're doing one for doing shipping as well. And then price check, we're just using the standard pricing, but we can add a custom one if we wanted to here as well. Last section that has an integration is the card payment, if that's applicable for you. We're going to do a deep dive of this in a future session, but in essence, there is the flexibility to integrate your storefront to a lot of different places, both internal data and external data, and this is where you would actually manage that capability. The last thing we'll show up here is the checkout flow. It'll take it, or there we go. It takes a second for it to load, but this flow is a typical flow that you would have, a screen flow, and it is applied at the experience builder level. So if we were to click this link here, it's actually going to deep dive us into Experience Cloud, And I guess it's not going to kick us over to checkout, but we can go over to checkout. And I guess it wants us to reload one more time. All right, checkout, here we come. And once we are here, we have this checkout flow right in the middle here, and you can see that we have a lot of different options for our checkout flow. But because we did the deployment, it automatically selected this, applied it, and then published it. So it's all should be working there, but that automatically gets attributed back to your store, and you can see which one's applied here. So that's a really quick overview of this section. There is another one about Commerce Einstein, which we'll talk about later, and then the store activation, which is simply the initial activation of the store. But now we should have a functioning instance, and we should be able to see our new products. So before we actually go into our storefront and see if any of this is working, we need to actually set up a user. So let's go up to the top. We're going to go down to accounts. And if you don't see accounts right here, you can click edit and you'll be able to add more items here, or you can get it to the app launcher. But we'll jump in here, we'll go to accounts, and we'll have our typical accounts. And you actually can see that we have one automatically created from that Scratch org creation process. But we're actually going to create a new one. So let's go into here, and we're going to call this, let's call it local coffee shop maybe. All right, and I think that's all the required information we need. So there are a couple of special things that we need to do for this account to get it associated to a buyer group that we had talked about earlier. One of the first things we need to do is we need to go to the top right and we need to click Enable as Buyer. So if you don't see this little drop down and this button here, by default, you can go to the page layout and add it in there. And once you click this, what it's going to do is kind of set up all of the behind the scenes data that you need for this account to actually be a buyer. Okay, so once you've done that, the next thing we'll do is we're going to associate this account with a buyer group. And again, some of these items down here might not be on the default page layout for you, so you can add those as related lists and they will be able to show up there afterwards. So we're going to go over here and we're going to associate this with our buyer group. This is just part of our general buyer group right now, so we want it to see all of the different products in it, and we'll click Assign. And I want to take a moment and just click on this record so you guys can see the data model here. But this is the general buyer group, and you can see that underneath the related tab, it's related to a price book, one in this case. And you can see that now the local coffee shop is a buyer group member, which means it can see all of the products that are entitled to this buyer group. So it's also attributed to a store. So if we were to dive into entitlements here, you can see that the entitlement policy is associated to a bunch of different products. So that's kind of how that data is used to understand, what products should show up for what users and what accounts. So now that we have that done, we'll come back over here, and the first thing we'll do is create a new contact point address. The contact point address is going to be important for us later on when we get to checkout, but it basically gives us the ability to add a billing and shipping address. So we'll give this a billing and of type billing. And you can have more than one of these, and we'll show that later on. But let's do maybe one Google way. Okay, and let's do a shipping one. And we'll save this. So now we have these two records in here. Let's get rid of them and let's refresh our account page. We'll be able to see that we have two contact point addresses, and we'll be able to use these in checkout later on. Last thing we need to do before we actually can go into this is we need to create a new contact. All right, so we'll say this is maybe Natasha and user. Okay, give an email address, and of course you'd actually fill out more information here if this is a real person. But now we have a contact, Now, one of the things you need to do over here on the right hand side is enable as a customer user. So this converts this this contact into a user as well. And you can see that we have a couple of different user licenses. I believe this one has one set up underneath Customer Community Plus, and it's as part of the deployment, it's created a profile called Buyer User Profile from Quick Start. So that's kind of a mouthful there, but basically you need to select the user license, and there's a couple different ones you can have. You can have Customer Community Plus, you can have Customer Community Login Plus, I think is what it's called, and a couple other ones. But you will want to create a new profile as part of that, and make sure that's associated to your Experience Cloud site and everything. So now we have this done. We'll click Save, and then we'll get a email as part of the activation of this. The last step we have to do is go in and set up a permission set assignment. And so there's at least one permission set you need. In this case, we're going to give this person a buyer permission set, but you can also give them a buyer manager, which gives them a little more access. But for this case, we don't need it. So we're going to click Save here. And now this user should be able to log in. And let's go back to Commerce app. All right, so now this person is set up as a user. Behind the scenes, the user is connected to the contact. And you can see if we click onto the dropdown, you can see login to experience as user now instead of the enable action there. So before we go into our storefront, I did want to make one call out. That was a lot to set up, both an account and a contact and user. The out-of-the-box capabilities here is functional, but it's pretty difficult to do if you're doing this, pretty frequently. And honestly, for most people or most accounts using Salesforce, you don't really want to give a standard user the ability to go to setup and create a new user. It's typically not best practice. So I'll make a mention here, and maybe we'll do it in a future series if you guys comment and are interested in seeing that. But you can create some screen flows that enable kind of the automatic creation of contact point addresses based on the account information, and you can automatically create users from a screen flow that pops open pretty easily and quickly just using standard flows. So if you're interested in that, comment, and we can definitely do a series or a session in the series on that. But now that we have our user and our account created, what we'll do is click Login to Experience as User. And what this will do is automatically log us into our site. And if we set up everything correctly, we should be able to see our categories. And it does look like we have categories. Looks like we're missing a logo that maybe we'll come back and fix at some point. We can see we're logged in as Natasha up here. And we can even see that we have our new category. So let's click into our category and see if we see our bagel. And we do see our bagel. And if we click on it, looks like we might have some work yet to do on the price. Looks like price is unavailable, but it is here and we are able to see that information. Let's just go back to maybe coffee accessories and click on one of these. We can see that there's some descriptions here. We can even add it to cart. And we'll continue shopping. One last thing I wanted to touch before we close up today is if we go back to coffee accessories, this page right here is what I'm referring to when I say product list page. It's a list of all the products, and on the left-hand side you can see these filters or facets. That's where you could actually filter down or narrow down the selection of products here if you had a long list. And then as you select into the product, you can see that this is the product detail page. And so these can be customized and updated, and we'll do that in one of our next videos. So hopefully that was helpful. If you liked the video and you feel like this is valuable, give us a like, give us a comment. Let me know what else everyone wants to be able to see, and we'll see what we can do to get into the next series.